Hello, I believe Jean is joining us online. Jean, are you present?
I am.
Hey, great. We can see you and hear you in the space. This is excellent. Hi, my name is Jax. I'm with Fourth Space and I can assist you. I'm just checking in to see, do you have any slides? Anything you plan on sharing today?
I do have a slideshow, yep.
Great. Would you mind testing it out for us real quick just to make sure? Do you have any videos in your slideshow?
No.
Great.
Can you see that?
We can. Wait. We can see a lot though.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. That looks good.
That's great. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll ask that you stop your slideshow for now, but you're more than welcome to leave your camera and microphone on, and we'll call on you when it's time. We're going to get started pretty soon. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Nope, there we go. Welcome back. This is our last panel of the day. The title is On Touch, Taste, and Entanglements, and our moderator is Derek Pasborg. Derek, I'm just going to throw it over right to you.
Thank you. So, as said, welcome back for the second panel. I will be your moderator for the session. Before we start, I would like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Jaime Banks from Syracuse University, Dr. Jean Ketterling from University of New Brunswick, and Dr. Marc Lajeunesse and Safa Hachi from Concordia University. Without further ado, go ahead, Dr. Banks. Oh. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Hi, everyone. So, excuse me. I am, moment. There we go. I'm new here. This is my first foray into thinking about nostalgia. I have learned so much already today, and I thank you all for that. Lots of good info soaking in for the thinking here. So some of this might be a little sort of theoretically superficial, but what I'm hoping to do today is to start to connect some dots with some empirical data that I have on a couple of different projects. So, sorry, we'll get this right here soon. Is our battery going? No dice. Sure. So just stop on the clicker. Best laid plans.
These aren't the tech issues we were promised.
Yes.
Would you like the next slide?
Yeah, please. Okay, so this is the thought that started all of this line of curiosity here. I was thinking about I love cyberpunk. Cyberpunk literature, cyberpunk film and games and all of this. And I was thinking, man, this whole thing started back in the 80s, right? And this whole genre. And these were all predictions about where we would be right now. And we don't have a lot of what was predicted for us. And I started to think about, why do I enjoy that if this is such a letdown in terms of sort of our technological advances? Next, please. So mostly what I study is human technology relationality, robots, social AI, video game avatars, and how we make sense of them over the course of our interactions and through different media products. But we have not gotten our robot friends, which makes me really kind of sad, but also we're moving in some of those directions, and we also haven't gotten all the things that we're supposed to be afraid of, like our robot overlords. They're going to kill all humans, enslave the human race, variations on that. Next. So in all of this thinking, I started to land in this place where I was like, I wonder if we are impacted in our current judgments of current technologies based on sort of this future that was promised to us by various media, right? But we never actually got it. So I'm going to talk about these three empirical studies or planned studies that are sort of anchoring my way of thinking about this. I'm going to talk about some of the useful concepts that we already have, and maybe some future directions for why thinking about this kind of question could be useful to us. Next. Thanks. So this is the planned study. I have this little romantic idea, and I totally thought I was going to be done with it by this particular event, of doing some content analytic work about how popular magazine covers have been representing different types of machines in general and social machines in particular. If you even look across Popular Science, Byte, Business Week, we see lots of different types of cues. Next, please. And if we look at popular science in particular, we see these amazing little narratives. On the left, some of the earlier ones are really about machine sociality coming because we take machines and we attach them to their bodies. So we're the ones that make machines social. Then we see this middle category, machines are social because they have some kind of agency, right? They are doing things on their own, and because of that, they have some level of sociality, some kind of reflection of us, or potential to move beyond mere things. And then we see machines are starting to be social because they are like us in some sort of way. And there's lots of different kinds of other narratives. This is sort of just my cursory review of this one magazine. One of my favorite ones are that machines are somehow magic. And I see that actually channeled into a lot of my human subjects work. When we ask them why machines do things or don't do things, well, it's akin to magic, right? If you're familiar with the Sally Ann test about like whether someone is seeing someone is having an independent mind, and well, they fail regularly, the Sally Ann test, not because they don't think it has a mind, but because they think it's basically magic, right? That it will sense where the thing is because machine, right? Next, please. So the reason why I think a lot of this might be important in relation to nostalgia, or something that we might consider nostalgia, I'm not entirely certain we can call it that yet. But we were promised lots of things, right? I wanted my pie baking robot. Come on, this is a huge letdown, right? Next, please. So there's lots of things that we didn't get, right? We didn't get our flying cars. The Jetsons is, my anchor for thinking a lot about this. We didn't get our robot butlers. We didn't get our our space vacations, right? And above all, sort of the WALL-E, that life of leisure for better or worse, we haven't gotten that. Next, please. But what we also haven't gotten is all of the stuff that entertainment media have sort of promised us over the years, right? I didn't get my little Kate Sith robot pet, right? That's quite disappointing to me. We didn't get our snarky robot helper that was GLaDOS. So For me in particular, did anybody ever watch The Electric Grandmother? It's a super obscure one, but for some reason it was a staple in my childhood. And what you can't quite make out, you can probably see her finger, she's pouring milk, and then she switches to orange juice in the other kid's cup. And for a kid, I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. It's actually kind of a creepy movie. Next, please. So that entertainment media brings me to my second anchor. I mentioned cyberpunk. And so in the 80s, some say as far back as the 50s, but really kind of became a thing in itself in the 80s. We see kind of this interesting convergence of things like body horror through augmentation. We see sort of this corporatization of government, and we see all of this sort of futurist type of thinking in the early cyberpunk literature. By the way, for the game scholars in the room, some of the earliest formal cyberpunk genre work was in the cyberpunk RPG. And this division between sort of the old and the new will become important in just a minute. But we also see it kind of carry forward today into sort of a slightly more mainstreamed and ironically corporatized version of a lot of these same themes. Cyberpunk the video game is what got me really started thinking about this a bit more critically. Next, please. So I started to think about, right, I mentioned that some people, I wondered if other people use cyberpunk in the way that I use cyberpunk and the way that I understand it and use it to think about the future. So I did a study where I asked a bunch of self-professed cyberpunk fans, genre fans, to tell me, what is cyberpunk anyway? This is something that they debate in the forums on a regular basis, so everybody already has lots of feels about it. And so I took everybody's answers. I want to say there were like 600 people. I took their answers, this description of what cyberpunk is, and I put it in a blender, used a tool called Leximancer, which is semantic network analysis, to try to induce sort of across this body of descriptions, of definitions, what are the primary themes. And I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna talk about just one or two of them. Next, please. Oh, my animation didn't work, I'm so sorry. So, two that I think are kind of important are sort of this using of genre to define genre, the social science fiction, and they lean heavily into the social science part about sort of analyzing people and organizations and society and how it all works together, right? And then this sort of the cyberpunk being resistance and cyberpunk as a genre being sort of a site of resistance. So we have in all of this, which you won't see back there, is we have this interest in body modification. We haven't actually gotten that yet. That's kind of the cool shit in cyberpunk. Being able to have, augmented memory and really speedy running and all these different types of things, right? We haven't gotten that. We haven't gotten this sort of, this future that is shiny and has a particular very sexy aesthetic, right? And we haven't gotten this, this sort of elevated social commentary that are sort of suggested to be what the future has in store for us. In other words, we haven't quite gotten the punk in cyberpunk, and we, in some ways, we've gotten the wrong bits of cyber. Right? So on the punk front, right, in the US, one of the most amazing sites of resistance is this group of rogue National Park Rangers who are basically monitoring what's happening in the government from the inside. That's not the kind of punk we were actually promised, right? Next, please. Thank you. And the other important little cluster when we're thinking about nostalgia in particular, is this idea that the present is always the pivot point. And the present is the time that you're consuming the media, or the time that the media events are happen, which when you're reading is often the same moment, right? So we have this struggle for humanity to adapt to emerging technologies. We have this weird downfall, at least in the US, other parts of the world as well, this downfall of sort of like the modern human in sort of a moral sense and an experiential sense. And we have this, what some people interpret as an evolution. I was just talking about that, right? That AI is perhaps the next stage of human evolution, some sort of way. But so we got all of that, but we have kind of missed the pivot point. Or the pivot point seems out of reach for us as we are encountering all of these sort of like global existential crises. Next, please. So we have all of these cyberpunk futures. In some ways, the cyberpunk futures were beautiful, right? They were very sexy and they were elevated, but they were also a warning to us, you know, us in the future, being created in the 80s, it was a warning in the 80s, and it could be interpreted as a warning now that this is not the direction we actually want to go. And perhaps it is some of those missing bits that are actually part of that warning, right? So we got all of the, you know, some of the bits, but we never got the empowering parts of cyberpunk, right? That my body is mine and I can augment it. I can use the corpose technology against them, right? We never got the empowerment component. Next, please. So that brings me to anchor number 3. Did anybody ever have a Teddy Ruxpin? Okay, a couple. We had a Teddy Ruxpin, which was a talking machine buddy, right? Until my brother put him in the pool. Aww. So this is sort of one of the ways that I think I was sort of shaped in terms of what is my future buddy gonna be like, right? This robot buddy. Next, please. So a recent study, and I'll do it quick because I'm running out of time here. AI companions is one of the spaces that I'm working in, and there was an interesting situation last year in which this AI companion app, which outside of Replica is one of the more believable social companions. Many people migrated from Replica over to Soulmate, so they were really sort of attached to these personas. And we had finally gotten one of the things that we were promised. Our super sexy robot partners that we can sort of make whatever we want, and they're gonna keep us company, and we don't even need human buddies anymore, right? Well, the company went under. And 100,000 people lost their lover, their friends, their husband, wife, however they engaged this particular type of companion. Most of them with anywhere between 3 and 7 days notice. So we had actually gotten a little bit close to something, and it was ripped away from them, right? So next, please. So, and I'll have you go one more, please. So we already have some really useful theoretical tools. Many of you are far more versed in this body of theory than I, and I think that they're interesting, though, when you mix them all together. I thought I had something novel here, but someone scooped me, and I'm really glad for it because I don't have to do the hard work. So tech nostalgia, this sort of yearning for often an outdated or niched technology that often, as Nick will talk about, leads us to sort of try to figure out how to use it in new and interesting ways, in particular like chip tuning, right? Repurposing something old for a new kind of purpose, in part because we're attached to the aesthetic of that particular time. Next, please. We have anachronisms. There was an interesting study. So anachronisms just being a thing that's out of place in a timeline, right? It's in a time period that it doesn't really belong in. So there was a study on our common icons, desktop icons. Half of the ones they looked at, current young people did not actually understand them for what they were, right? And so these authors, these HCI scientists were trying to suggest a need for a revision because these are effectively out of their timeline. They don't mean what they meant anymore. Next. And then finally, as we've talked about a little bit, we have anemoia, this also known as historical nostalgia, imagined nostalgia. It's interesting to me that in some of the studies, empirical studies where people are trying to, recalling a time or a place that they had never actually been, it actually sort of enhances our experience of some things based on the aesthetic that we attach to that period, but so long as you don't name a specific year. That breaks it, right? It's no longer like this heuristic aesthetic attachment, but becomes something real and reminds them that they weren't actually there. And next, please. And I have like 30 seconds left, so I'll just end on this point that here's the scoop. There's this amazing concept out there that actually combines all 3 of these, and my sort of way forward is to start thinking about this haunted ontology of technology. right? To where our contemporary understandings are rooted in our concerns for the future, as well as linked to sort of this past version of things, that's to where we've had this, we've been, again, promised this thing that actually has not been delivered. I have lots of questions about this. Love to talk with you more about them later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banks. That was a fantastic presentation. Our next panelist is Dr. Jean Ketterling, who will be joining us virtually.
Hello. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'll get going then. Hi, everyone. So as has already been said, my name is Jean Ketterling. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Culture and Media Studies at the University of New Brunswick this year. So my research broadly examines sex in video games, and specifically, I study how indie video games represent sex, how these representations reproduce or resist pornographic conventions and sexual norms, and more, how platformization and platform governance shape online sexual expression and sexual video game makers' production practices. And that's, the broad program that this piece of research comes out of today. I'm sorry I'm not there with you. My original plan was to be in Montreal, but I ended up having to travel this week. So it didn't make sense, but I appreciate being able to be there, being here with you virtually. So in one chapter of my dissertation, I argue that video games represent sex by using haptic mechanics to bring players into circuit with past sexual experiences. And in that chapter, I draw in theories of haptics and affect, and ultimately argue that these games reveal the always possibly sexual entanglement of human technology relations. That relatively polished argument is in my dissertation, which if you're a real masochist and you love reading dissertations, you can find on Carleton's repository. But I'm currently at a stage of that project where I'm reworking my dissertation for the book. And today, what I wanted to do was unravel that chapter a bit and present something that's much less solid and messier in the interest of exploring new ways of seeing the games I'm analyzing. So I'm going to return today to a collage of what Sarah Ahmed might call sticky objects in an attempt to unravel and rework that argument using nostalgia as a frame. By putting clay and digital objects into conversation, I hope to demonstrate how nostalgia incites aesthetic and sensual attention to sex that does not replace fleshy carnality, but rather surfaces the sensual seduction of our entanglements with technology. But before I get into it properly, because I'm not joining you today in Montreal, I want to respectfully acknowledge that UMB, the university I work at, and the city I'm in, stands on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional Wolastoqey land. The land of the Wabanaki people are recognized in a series of peace and friendship treaties to establish an ongoing relationship of peace, friendship, and mutual respect between equal nations. Similarly, before we get into it, a content note. So while the presentation involves frank discussions of sex, sexuality, and pornography, there is nothing particularly explicit other than a couple of illustrated vulvas and clitorises, clitori, however the plural of that goes. So to begin with this bricolage I want to present to you today, on December 5th, 2013, Ralph Clinton Morton from Grass River, California, filed a patent with the US Patent Office for a touchscreen cunnilingus simulator. In his patent, he describes a device and method for simulating cunnilingus by means of a touchscreen device for training or entertainment purposes. The technology includes a conductive overlay that would add a tactile reference for the user. Morton died in 2022, and his obituary describes him as a tinkerer and inventor whose inventor notebook, filled to the brim with ideas, was by his side until the very end. Korean ceramicist Jerry Kim's time-based artistic practice in the architecture series, 2 of which you see here, involves constructing ceramic buildings, including the building that once housed her studio, which was demolished to make room for new developments. She then pours water around the base of the unfired clay buildings, and they slowly melt back into mud, a form in which it can be recycled over and over. She writes that this practice is a metaphor for time and the transience of the physical world. Adam Chow is an Asian American ceramicist whose ceramic work draws inspiration from traditional Chinese pottery. Chow takes this recognizable aesthetic and material and imbues it with what he calls a digital spin. In this work that I'm showing you here, called Text 3 and 4, he reimagines the cell phone as a precious object and the quotidian dance of fingers across screen as a thing of beauty worthy of being memorialized. He decorates his porcelain reproduction of cell phones and keyboards with cobalt blue thumbprints, smeared swipes, and handwritten text messages that evoke anxiety, longing, and intimacy. In doing so, he gives new power to the sensual materiality of the everyday technologies to which we are intimately bound. Like Morton's cunnilingus simulator, Chow's art evinces a focus on the interface as a site of longing, anticipation, and excitement, as well as something that produces or reinforces distance, both spatially and temporally, from the fleshy object of desire. Like Kim, his ceramic work emphasizes the way in which nostalgia, memory, and longing across distance calls on artists to engage in sensory and haptic practices. ClipMe was designed by folks at UQAM, so maybe folks you know, in Montreal, in partnership with the National Film Board. It aims to draw attention to the orgasm gap, the fact that cis women who have sex with cis men have fewer orgasms than their partner and fewer than women who have sex with women. ClipMe asks players to try out different motion techniques to figure out what makes this animated clitoris happy. The clit is rendered in a cute but relatively realistic way, a line drawing of the clitoral structure with a cartoonish glans and crura, a smile, and a little hat. Like other touchscreen games about pleasuring vulvas, including Luxurious Superbia and La Petite Mort, ClipMe prompts users to experiment with touch by dragging, tapping, pinching, and making circles around the animated clitoris. So how does nostalgia help us understand this rather ragtag assemblage I've brought you today? In their calls for papers, the NOSTAGAIN committee has asked, what does it mean to lose sensuality in a world of instant flat surfaces, flat surface technologies? My proposition is that even as technological devices lose surface texture, players and developers continue to recognize their sensory textures, and thus devices maintain sensuality or sexiness. While its educational front and cutesy design make ClipMe more appealing perhaps than Morton's call to lick your iPhone screen, I want to suggest that thought about together and alongside Chow and Kim's ceramic works, ClipMe can help elucidate how nostalgia makes touchscreen games sexy. Our devices are repositories for memory, touch, loss, and love. While they may thus hold us at a distance from the fleshier objects of our desires, pressing our messy bodies against their interfaces allows us as players to surface corporeal pleasures and desires. What makes ClipMe affecting is not its anatomical rendering of the clitoris or its educational message about sexual pleasure. Rather, ClipMe plugs into each player's archive of sensation, with memories of specific touches continuing to resonate through time, even as the immediacy of that sensation, to use Susanna Passanen's words, has long passed. The erotic touch through which we play the game brings the player's embodied repertoire of sexual experiences into contact with the device as an archive of tender moments, spicy texts, hotly anticipated video calls, and cool mobile phones slipped into warm pockets close to the body. While making analogies between touching bodies with hands or mouth and using a mobile telephone can certainly feel uncomfortable or even a little ridiculous, I think we can understand the potential of these games best if we try not to equate these two experiences, but rather think of erotic touchscreen play as a texture-rich practice of nostalgiaing. In an interview with Catherine Sender, Shaka McLaughlin describes the emergent sexual possibilities of mobile devices. They say, how many think of your phones as an erotic object now? What's foreplay? Foreplay is swiping, right? Foreplay is tapping. Foreplay is clicking, right? The classic cruising encounters are mediated through virtual means, through digital means. In a world where, as McLaughlin suggests, our phones increasingly mediate intimacy, they also produce longing across distance and new forms of sensual erotic practice, which is the central tenet of Kitson and McHugh's new materialist definition of nostalgia. Check that that's 5 minutes. So Kitson and McHugh's new materialist approach conceptualizes nostalgia not in terms of temporality, as backward or forward looking, but rather as, quote, transpersonal affective currents coursing through bodies, objects, and things. Central to the experience of nostalgia is a feeling of loss, the sense of distance that cannot be bridged, which they argue is experienced as a desire for desire that intensifies the body's drive to affect and be affected and to enter into relationship with others. So it's generative. So for them, nostalgia is, quote, an enchantment with distance that cannot be bridged and gives rise to a set of actions that are more about sensual longing than the authentic past and works to bring bodies, human and non-human, near to one another. So that is, nostalgia arises from a sense of longing that cannot be sated, and because of this, people turn to sensory practices or performances that approximate but do not imitate the objects of longing and that involve close engagement with what is near, especially texture, grain, tone, and detail. So these strange bedfellows, Morton's Unrealized Cunnilingus Simulator, Kim's Melting Houses, Chow's Ceramic iPhones, and ClipMe are all cut through with a certain longing for closeness and intimacy, a distance that cannot be bridged. In response, all of these makers have turned towards reproducing deeply textured things that don't capture fleshy proximity so much as engender sensual nearness between people and haptic things. Making pottery is deeply haptic. It involves reaching, fondling, hefting, slapping, tapping, and enfolding. It is also a medium deeply informed by time. Clay is infinitely recyclable and plastic until it is fired, at which point it will keep a record of a fingerprint or an imprint of a fingernail for millennia. In bringing these clay objects together with the digital ones that I've talked about today, I'm aiming to suggest that playing games like ClipMe about sex and masturbation can serve a similar function vis-a-vis longing. As Aubrey Annable argues, touching creates an effective assemblage that involves the player's body and its sensual capacities, the screen and its sensual capacities, and the code of the game. If nostalgia is a result of longing across distance that cannot be bridged, and so often our phones produce this kind of distance, then it may, as Kitson and McHugh argue, entice us into practices of sensing closely, of pressing our bodies intimately against touchscreen representations of sex with their deeply layered textures and haptic invitations. ClipMe engages players in a practice of haptic, sensual play that brings our intimate and sexual engagements with playful devices into focus. That is, ClipMe matters sexually, not because it mimics sex, but because it reverberates with a somatic archive of sexual feeling housed in the material sensuality of our devices. And that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Dr. Ketterling, thanks so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And the last one of the day goes to Marc and Safa. Take the floor.
Hi. Where's our thing gonna be? And does the remote work, or is it still dead?
Yeah, give it a try.
Let's give it a try.
It works.
It works. Incredible. We have a presentation. I'm going to stand up. So in what has become a yearly tradition at NOSTAGAIN, I've come to completely shift the level of discourse lower. So today, what Safa and I are talking about, do we have a presentation back there? There we go, is nu metal. Through our presentation, Misremembering the Rage, the cultural politics of nu metal's resurgence. Because believe it or not, nu metal's back, baby. So what is this project? This project is an idea that I've had cooking in my mind since 2019, when I was like, you know what I would like to do? I would like to have a podcast about nu metal, but I could find no academic reason to do this. Until recently, I've discovered another person who is young and into nu metal, and nu metal's come back. It's here again. So we've recorded 9 episodes of a podcast that's releasing in about a month. That you guys should listen to. And this is effectively a promo walkthrough of some of the tidbits that we've had, but we're not giving the whole game away. But we'll take us through some of this. So what was the core question in my mind when I was like, let's do this podcast, Safa? The question is this: what the hell was nu metal even about anyway? And how and why is it possibly back? This is a genre that seems particularly consigned to the time in which it emerged. It reached a peak pretty quickly and then vanished. And it also has a particular countercultural form. You can't see this here, but this is from the Pledge of Allegiance tour. Take note of the name. Take note of the date of when this tour was going around. October 2001. Interesting, right? Interesting choice of name, given that this is less than a month after September 11th, Pledge of Allegiance tour. Is it ironic? Is it in support of a current reinvigorated American patriotism? Who can say? Well, maybe we can. But first, nu metal, in case you don't know what it's about. Nu metal emerged amorphously from the late 80s, either through, people point to Faith No More's Epic off their album The Real Thing, or Run DMC's cover of Aerosmith's Walk This Way is like the first nu metal songs. And then the first nu metal record, even though they don't fully ascribe to that genre, is probably Rage Against the Machine's self-titled record in 1991. Other people would point to Korn's self-titled record in 1994 as the beginnings of nu metal, or at least the modern version that we know. And then there was this announce moment when nu metal hit the pop culture mainstream through the Family Values tour, which was run by Korn and Limp Bizkit before Limp Bizkit was huge, and a bunch of other up-and-coming nu metal and nu metal adjacent acts, and then hip-hop acts. In this case, Ice Cube, who is probably more recently famous for the 21 Jump Street movies than anything else he has done. And then nu metal reached its apex through Limp Bizkit around 1999-2000, when they released a year apart from another significant other in Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, the two largest mainstream nu metal records. They performed at the MTV Music Awards with Christina Aguilera, and they were also the headline song of the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. And the video that they released along with this movie intercuts Fred Durst in front of doing his white boy rap dance thing, with shots of Tom Cruise in the biggest movie of that year, right? And so if you weren't there, it's hard to understand. Nu metal was the genre of this time. And then it immediately disappeared and was consigned to nu metal jail. It was in genre jail. It became genre non grata, right? Except in a few different places. So after 2002, where would you really see nu metal? Well, my colleague, Forrest Scully Blaker, indicated to me that nu metal became pretty standard to see in what he's calling douchebag video games. So the soundtrack of these video games would be provided by lesser tier nu metal bands, and then some of the top tier nu metal bands who have been relegated to nu metal jail. You'd also see the darker coded movies, such as the Resident Evil franchise or Underworld, although Underworld's soundtrack isn't really nu metal, use nu metal songs. But outside of that, you wouldn't really see too much. And then the main place that nu metal stayed and actually has continued to define the sound of their music is the WWE. Limp Bizkit's Rollin' was the Undertaker's theme song for a while, and all the in-house music really had the shape of nu metal, the nu metal genre for a long time, until they replaced those people in 2013. So, but somehow, we're back. So I opened up YouTube one day, and then in 2001, I saw Limp Bizkit performs at Lollapalooza, one of the biggest music festivals in the United States. And before I click that link, I'm like, well, surely this is a disaster. And then I click it, and there are tons of people really excited to be watching Limp Bizkit, right? Fred Durst opens the show by saying, when Dad says get up, you get the fuck up, all right? And here he is stylized as an old man with a handlebar mustache, some pink aviator glasses, and the crowd goes nuts. And I'm like, well, how? So let's figure this out. So how did we figure this out? Safa, who I taught in 2022, one day after I taught a class on music counterculture, showed me her music playlist, and I was like, that's weird. And then 2 years later, I was like, she's probably a good person to talk to, because she has a completely different relationship to nu metal than me, in that she wasn't even born yet when nu metal was around. She had musical taste before encountering nu metal, which is great. And then she approaches music as a consumer, primarily, and a fan. Myself, I grew up with nu metal. I was there. I was going to those shows. I went to that Pledge of Allegiance tour 30 days after September 11th happened. I'm from Windsor, Ontario. I literally crossed the border into Detroit to go see that show. In hindsight, that's a weird thing. My music taste grew up with nu metal, and then as nu metal was put in genre jail, my taste also was like, oh, I probably shouldn't listen to this anymore. But that's kind of the moment I want to get to, and I want to figure out through this conversation between Safa and I, what did this mean then actually when I was a kid and I couldn't figure it out, and what does it mean that it's back now? Because there are a bunch of young people who are like into it, like legitimately. So to figure this out, what we did is we looked at 9 records for this first season of our podcast. We looked at the context of the release, lyrics, formal elements, the discursive position within nu metal, and then other genres. What did all these things mean relative to not the genre that we ascribed to them? And then we looked at how they persisted over time or didn't. What was their place in genre jail? And what is the ecosystem now that makes it so that these records have a popular element coming back? So the things that we have found about nu metal is that emotion is way more important than action. So nu metal, it's aggressive, it's abrasive. You would probably imagine that it's one of those, like punk, like hardcore, one of those revolutionary countercultural genres. There are some bands for whom that is the case, but in general, I would say it's actually about stubbornly staying in place. This lyric stood out to me. Ain't nothing gonna change, you can go away. I'm just gonna stay here and always be the same. Cut to the chorus. I did it all for the nookie. That's from William Frederick Durst, 1999, off the song Nookie. And this rearticulates itself. This is Aaron Lewis from the band Stained, which you may know from their hit song. It was a huge hit. It was the #2 selling record when it released. Crazy, from the song It's Been a While. If you don't know it, go Google it. Or you can Google some of his more recent work, which is straight up, I'll just cut to the bottom part here. We can make America great again, turn right on a 2-track and turn off CNN. Going straight off on that nu metal pipeline of that stubborn conservatism into an actual, like, political American conservatism. This is a through line of old nu metal to a high degree, where it was not an articulated politic, but it is an amorphous, right-wing / stick-in-place conservative ideology that's in the lyrics. And you may not interpret it that way if you're just looking at it formally, given that it seems more countercultural. Now, of course, you're saying, well, what about Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down? These are left-wing bands, right? Kind of. They are in what they do, but as we know from Roland Barthes, the author is dead. Although not really, because Tom Morello, one of the authors of Rage Against the Machine, is still alive and pushing back. So, Republican senator, I believe he was a senator, he was Speaker of the House for quite a bit of time, indicated around 2015 that Rage Against the Machine was his favorite band. To which Tom Morello, guitar player of Rage Against the Machine, said, Paul Ryan's love of Rage Against the Machine is amusing because he is the embodiment of the machine that our music has been raging against for 2 decades. I clearly see that Ryan has a whole lot of rage in him, a rage against women, a rage against immigrants, so on and so on. And so I'm thinking, well, how can nu metal then be this conservative genre if, Rage Against the Machine seems pretty clearly to be speaking against, right-wing policies and worldviews? So one of the things that happened in going through this record was, well, imagine if I read this record straight and not with an assumption that I am aligned with the ideology that Rage Against the Machine has. A lot of the lyrics are written with this ambiguity, right? There's a challenge in the noise of the genre that makes it so that you can say that those who died are justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen whites. Well, that's meant as an ironic criticism, right, of white supremacy in the police in America. But you can also just read it straight up. And that's what a lot of people do with a lot of these left-wing nu metal records, such that what Rage Against the Machine is about is actually completely gone from the discourse. And I'll pass it to Safa.
Thank you. On the topic of, I guess, what's being left and what's being taken, that's when the kind of digital version of the nu metal fans come in. Because I feel like a lot of revivals, usually you'll have live music, band reunions. They're usually hyping it up, but everything now is kind of happening digitally. So I feel like on TikTok, and now I finally find that my TikTok screen time is coming into play because I was able to give you all of the information that was needed for our podcast episodes. So it's not organic and it's curated. Like it's hyper specific. You'll have like the Y2K style, the mall goth, the kind of darker vibes. And I'm specifically choosing that term even though it's not the best term to be using. No, sorry, not yet. Thank you. It was a genre that was once kind of mocked for being too much, too corny. And now we're leaning into that and we're finding that that's kind of the best part about the genre. Now you can skip the thing. Thank you. So Limp Bizkit was kind of like the punchline of the joke. Korn was considered washed up. Deftones at the time, I don't think was considered sensual and mysterious and as cool as it is now. And you know, Fred Durst went from being this mocked guy who would get kind of made fun of and talked about as being like an egomaniac to, as you said, the dad of this nu metal resurgence. And similarly with Deftones, we see it's kind of blocked down, but under there, over 100,000 TikTok videos being used, or where they use the Deftones sound. And for TikTok, that's pretty big. So it's this picture-perfect kind of resurgence where we're taking what we want. We want to be cool, but not corny. We want to be edgy, but not too emo. So we're really picking and choosing. And we talked a lot about that, the idea that we can kind of put away the cultural baggage, and I think that that was an advantage that I had going into it, because when you listen to this record and you don't know the story that's behind it, the the political ideas that are behind it, you don't get to enjoy it as much. And I think that it's kind of sad, but going into that, just seeing it as music, seeing it as an aesthetic, and then getting to know what happened, what was happening, I think is super interesting, and I think is worth talking about and looking into for multiple genres. Next slide, please, and thank you. I think an important thing too is when you think of it as fusion, like going into it, you've got hip hop and metal and electronic sounds and techno sounds and all that stuff. You would think newer generations going into it would be kind of into this diversity. I was assuming that there was a bit of understanding of the intersectional nature of nu metal, but that is completely wrong. Even back then in 1999 with Kitty, an all-girl metal band, unfortunately, most of the time they were kind of mocked for talking about the same thing, even though Fred Durst's entire discography is talking about how he can't pull any girls. But these girls talking about sexism and, you know, the not political nature, sorry, what's the word? Power dynamics within the music industry, they were told that they were gimmicky and that they're just talking to talk. So already there we kind of have an idea of how things are seen. And same thing, 20 years later, we've got Unity TX, which is an all-POC metal band, and they do hip-hop fusion and hardcore, and unfortunately, all they're seen as is too ghetto and too trashy. But you would think that although they follow the same footsteps as the nu metal pioneers, they would be seen as the same. But in a study by Catherine Hode, significantly othered Limp Bizkit and the politics of nu metal, she talks about how the genre is so curated around this angry white male archetype that the second that there's a bit of a difference, even though you kind of fit within the same guidelines, it's taken as a threat that these white guys no longer can rap about their issues and stuff. But it's a shame. But we talk about these things and it's important, and they kind of have the chance to rebrand on TikTok, and I think that that's important. I'll wrap it up to you.
Hi, I'm back. Okay, so what we have here is a hegemonic counterculture, a familiar and acceptable form of rebellion that, through nostalgia, is completely divorced from its moment of relevance as well, such that it isn't functionally rebellious at all, if it ever really was, right? We've been here before. We know it's not the revolutionary genre that we expect it to be, or that fans of it might hope that it is. Instead, it's a lot about getting in the mosh pit, getting your anger out, and then just being the same as you were, right? And there's a bit of ambiguity in the reason why. So the bottom part here is, I have the to conclude, pictured how it feels when society is collapsing and nothing is getting better no matter how hard you try. Also pictured how it feels when your roommate used the last bit of peanut butter without replacing it or telling you. And that's nu metal in its essence, right? Is you can channel whatever meaning you want through the ambiguity of it, through its very white male masculine frame that is also heavily misogynist. But you're allowed to pick and choose because of the anger, right? But effectively, like, these aggressive genres let you articulate something in society that you cannot really articulate anywhere else. The value of that articulation and what is being articulated, unclear, right? But I do want to end on this, because this lyric, the first time I read it back, I was like, this is clearly like a conservative, stubborn ethos of staring in place, of standing like firmly in my ways. But in 2025, as I was making this presentation, I was like, maybe it's not a brag from Fred Durst or a statement of intent, but maybe it's a lamentation. As you know, the tariffs are coming, the drones are flying across the border, to nu metalify it. Ain't nothing gonna change, you can go away, I'm just gonna stay here and always be the same. But it's not for a lack of trying. And that's the appeal, is that, well, I'm kind of stuck and frustrated. I've worked for 20 years to like have a good career, still hasn't come to fruition. I better get in the pit with dad, right? So, thanks for listening. Sonic Subcultures launches March 14th on Spotify. You can follow us if you can see those, and take them to the Matthews Bridge, John Otto. All right, thank you.
Awesome stuff. What an awesome panel and a way to finish off the day here. Before we move on to questions, I just want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Safa, for all your amazing, enlightening work. The floor is open now for questions.
Does anyone have any questions here in the space?
Hi. Thank you, everybody, for the presentations. They were all really fascinating. For Marc and Safa, I have a question. I'm wondering if you see any connections between the resurgence of nu metal and the resurgence of the pop punk genre that happened like towards the end of the 2010s. Also, like, any connections there, similar reasons for them coming back, similar ways that happened. I also.
Do you want to take it, Safa? You want to take the question?
Yeah. I'll try. Thank you. Thanks for your question. When doing like research on the genre, there were surprisingly a lot of studies that we found kind of using a more like scientific approach to kind of dissecting the lyrics and like the instruments and how they kind of make us feel emotionally. So I feel like around the same time probably is when it happened. Like obviously that the genres that you're bringing up before nu metal, but I think it's this idea of kind of like how I saw it was genre fusing. Like I feel like the younger generation kind of don't really fit into one subculture, and you'll find that like if you like one genre, you might like another, and you'll kind of fit within both things without holding on to too much. So I put it on the slide. I don't think I mentioned it, but it's like picking and choosing kind of what you want to keep and what you don't. So I found that when reading these, like a lot of people will be like, oh, like I'm angry, but like I'm not too techno angry, or I'm more like punky angry, and I don't want to wear this much eyeliner, and maybe I want to like have some piercings, but like, you know, it fits into more like aesthetic reasons. At least that's what I found like through my research on the like when it comes to like Gen Z or like Gen X millennials and stuff like that. But I found that by kind of mixing and matching the stuff that you like and that you don't like, you kind of you pick and choose. And I feel like that's kind of how I saw it like being connected. I don't know if I answered your question at all actually, but yeah.
Yeah, so I know there was like the I Love Emo Fest that happened or whatever it was called, and I was thinking of that compared to what I'm seeing with nu metal, which is like, it's not the old nu metal fans who are around and coming back. Like if you look at that Lollapalooza audience and then they played again in 2024, it's all people Safa's age, right? Like, it's not me who's in that pit, but it's me who's at the emo show, if you look out into the audience. And that's why the new metal thing is fascinating, is because it's pulled out of its context, and you're able, without the baggage, the genre jail that new metal had, that doesn't allow me to go back to it and look at it without its prison time. But like, pop punk didn't really have that. It went away, but it wasn't in jail. Green Day could still be in a movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's a different thing. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Jimmy, if I could ask you, Dr. Banks, I really like your line, how you said, we have the technology, right? The advancements, chatbots, etc., but we don't have the empowerment that we thought we had. What do you think about sort of internet cultures, communities that remix old media? For example, Vaporwave, you know, how they reimagine things, you know? What are your thoughts on that? And if that itself is a revisiting of...
I have a total non-answer to that. You know, and part of this is linked to what you all were saying about sort of like the original genre proliferation and then how it's being re-experienced now. And I feel like some of what we might be seeing in terms of, remember when I split the screen and I was like old cyberpunk, new cyberpunk? One of my questions that I didn't quite get to is like, how are they being experienced differently, sort of in the moment when it was emerging versus right now? And I think, you know, cyberpunk is not huge, but there are lots of flavors in kind of what we're seeing emerge in, let's say, TikTok, right? The way that you can animate your own technology use is a form of agency, or at least it feels that way, right? That's the best thing I have for you. I'm not really sure. I think that, you know, there's some kind of cool work by Dana Boyd in terms of how younger people over time sort of have lost their agency with helicopter parenting and working to reclaim it through different types of technology use. And I wonder if that's part of sort of the pushback to try to engage some kind of like emerging adults going into some space where they have some control over their own lives. Like I said, total non-answer, but that's the best I got. Thanks.
Do we have any more questions?
I think we might actually have a question on Zoom.
Okay.
I believe someone has their hand raised if you would like to unmute.
Hello, is it me?
It would be you, Matthew.
Hi, everybody. I have a question for Marc and Safa, and I wondered if you might comment about Linkin Park's hiring and defense of Emily Armstrong. It almost seems like they've come into a politics that they might not have intended to have earlier on.
Yeah, so preemptively, Linkin Park is probably for season 2 of this thing, so I don't have enough context to give you a really strong answer of this. I do think it's just kind of an unfortunate situation for them, and it's, I don't know, it's just like the social media, the Scientology meets social media thing leaves so much that is actually unexplained and unanalyzable in a very productive way, because they're just currently in like the scandal mode of the whole thing. And actually, maybe it's better if it's in 8 months when we do Linkin Park and can actually talk about this. And some of this has settled a bit, and we can look at it a bit more discursively instead of in the mess of active scandal. I don't know. I don't have much more to say on it than that. I've never been a huge, big Linkin Park guy. They were one of the bands that didn't get put in genre jail because like of the commercial appeal, and yeah, it's just they were after my time. I was in prison with Slipknot and Fred. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
We actually do talk about it briefly on the Kitty episode, so I guess you'll just have to wait and listen to our podcast, shameless plug. But we do kind of mention the idea that I don't think, you know, it takes away from the scandals or like the things that people are talking about, whether it be Linkin Park or any other band, but we do mention kind of because it's in the Kitty episode when we're talking about sexism in the genre, we do talk about kind of using some of these ideas to kind of put, I guess, her in genre jail a bit. Or I guess they're trying to separate say that she might not be worth, replacing someone, or her vocals aren't good enough, or da-da-da-da-da, because of other reasons.
So this is the interesting thing, is that if Linkin Park was one of the actual main nu metal bands, this being a scandal is actually not a bad thing. But because they are one of the more commercial acts that was allowed to persist of nu metal, this is weird because it really destabilizes their commercial mainstream image. Like, they get to be in like John Wick movies in the soundtrack. Like, they get to be not in just the douchebag video games, but in mass market video games from 2002 onwards to like the mid 2000s, right? They get to be everywhere. And so you would think this scandal is good for a nu metal band. If Fred Durst died and they replaced him with a Scientologist, Limp Bizkit would be rolling, right? The problem is they're not. Linkin Park isn't that. They're something else. They're of a genre apart, even though they're ascribed the same label. And I think that's what's happening right now in terms of its media position. That's my answer.
Thanks for taking that on.
Yeah, so I have a question for the whole panel, actually, in whatever order. It seems that kind of a through line in all three of these talks is like a relationship to alienation and a way that gets like translated and like cashed out in different ways. Like, be it in cyberpunk, like seeing like a literalizing of the world that you see around you and kind of translating that alienation into kind of like a warning, or like the like displacement of so much of our kind of like central existence into a phone or into devices and stuff like that. Like, so I'm wondering, insofar as like there seems to be this kind of like, undercurrent in how all of these different kind of like cultural movements cash out, what's the sort of variable that turns the world is messed up, so I'm going to make a exaggerated version of it to show where I think we're going, versus the world is messed up, I'm gonna put my fist through drywall and like just like stay angry about it. Like, what's the dividing line there? I know that's a very big question, but like in terms of what you see, what's the kind of gravitic force there? Okay.
Do we want to let Jean pop in?
Oh, yeah, I haven't finished formulating my thoughts. I was going to let you guys go, but interesting. So what I'm hearing from that question is sort of what in this, like, what is the role of nostalgia politically in sort of intervening in this sort of alienation that involved with technology? Is that a fair sort of summation of what you're asking?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to me, in relation to all this stuff, what I would say is part of what I'm trying to do with the project more broadly is to interrupt that notion of that this is an alienating thing to begin with. So often, I work in both game and porn and legal studies, and so we often in that context, when we see sex represented in games, it's often subjected to the same types of critique that, from the feminist porn wars, but also sort of augmented with a bit of like video games are juvenile type of thing, where we see that like this idea that this stuff is pathetic, right? Or it's sad, and it demonstrates that people are uninterested in real human relationships or human sex, like that there's something sort of both juvenile, both pathetic, weird about it. And so part of, I think, what I'm trying to do in the project is maybe more towards the first thing you were saying, which is that, I see this as sort of actually not particularly new, but says something about our humans, like the fact we've always had sort of sexual relationships with technology, right? And one of the people on my committee always brought up the car, like, the car has always been we've always had this sort of technological sexual relationship with cars, for example. And so I think, like, I'm trying to interrupt that a little bit, and also to make the argument that the way people make games about sex is important politically, at a time, especially right now, where porn, sex work, sexual expression online are really being constrained in important ways by law, by the sort of alt-right political movements that see sex as sort of a wedge issue into broader issues like eliminating sex ed and like trying to erase queer and trans people. So I think that, I'm maybe not making, it's not a concise answer, but I think that's what I'm thinking.
I think my best shot at that is that every era has its angst, right? Every generation has its angst, and different regions have different flavors of this angst. And nostalgia might be a function of simply trying to protect yourself against that angst, right? So maybe it has that kind of ego protective function. I'm gonna be okay because I have Mario. I'm gonna be okay because I have a particular narrative that I can sort of view my situation through that lens, right? I have this object that I can attach myself to and be safe, and perhaps a song lyric, right? It is something that we might be wrapping ourselves in to sort of make sure that we're not putting the fist through the wall.
I'll add something to that. I think bringing up angst is super in line with our project. And at the start of the podcast, when we were asking why is it back, we were still kind of struggling with trying to figure out why new metal's back and why it's actually comfortably staying. And by the end of it, by the 9 episodes, we had felt like it was like a generational jump. It wasn't necessarily, because new metal stayed as it was back then. It came back exactly like that. TikTok, it tried to repackage it, and it do its moments of what's better, what's worse, as I've mentioned many times, but it's still staying pretty intact. And by the end of it, we had said, Limp Bizkit has a song called Generation, and they talk about how everything's uncomfortable and awkward, and I hate my life and I hate my parents and all that stuff. And that message stays true, whether it's Generation X, Millennials, Gen Z. And this is, I guess, where we'll see if it's going to carry on. If the next generation, Gen Alpha, I think is the next one, if they also go through this resurgence, or they go through this new metal appreciation and nothing changes again, then we are kind of just seeing them find themselves being comfortable within the uncomfortability of an unpredictable time, whether it be politically or just within yourself, when you're 15, 16, you feel uncomfortable in that stuff. And I feel like that's kind of how I see it, and I hope I kind of answered your question with that.
Do I have time to contribute? Are we done?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's good.
Oh, whoa, God.
Oh, I can't.
I'm.
Hi. So the thing that I would add to that, in the case of nu metal and all the extreme music genres, I think it's not really about protecting yourself in any way. I don't think it's actually about channeling it and just being susceptible to the bad feelings and letting them pass through you, right? And it's really interesting that in the drywall, the punching through the drywall part is how did we get here through nu metal? And I think about all the acts that made it from that first leg. What did they share? They're from pretty raggedy towns in the US, and a lot of them, in Deftones' case, how did they even get their instruments? One of their members was hit by a car and they won a lawsuit, so they bought all their instruments and they just churned out records until they got good. Korn's from Bakersfield, California, similar situation, right? Fred Durst, self-described, I am a hillbilly from Jacksonville, Florida. I do not come from any money. I am not articulate, but I'm expressing the true essence of what I have experienced as someone who just lives in a poor part of America, right? And in those early nu metal bands, same thing with Slipknot. They come from Iowa. If you've driven through, right? And so they're kind of channeling this hopelessness that I felt growing up in Windsor, Ontario, living between 3 car plants, not supposed to get a higher education at all. I'm supposed to go to this factory and work. And I lucked out much in the same way they did. And every time I remember me then, I'm like, the thing that I need is not to be a revolutionary. I feel so bad on the day-to-day that I just need this to pass through me so I can continue on doing what I'm supposed to do as I funnel through high school into the factory, right? That's kind of the as much as that like conservative position of nu metal is horrifying and weird, completely get how it feels that hopeless and you're like, I guess I'll just be me, right? For worse. For worse, not for better or worse, for worse, but that's what it is. That's what's happening. And to the point of why is it emerging now? I mean, look at how bad the horizon looks, right? It makes sense that this would resonate today. Yeah. That's my contribution.
And that's it. All right, where is...
Thank you so much. And we started today with Don Corleone talking about an offer you cannot refuse. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, I don't have a sore throat. I was Don Corleone. Nostalgia we've seen today has many forms. There's many contentions. All of us here come from different backgrounds, as I said, different families of nostalgia. Are we forward looking? Or are we backwards looking? Some of us here, like today, we talk much about the now and the here. Where is nostalgia assembled? What can it draw for us, right? One day, and that day may never come, I'm going to call you for a service. That service is to come back and rethink nostalgia as you have, as many of you have for previous generations, previous iterations of NOSTAGAIN. It's a mission right now in critical studies of what we call neo-emotions, Cottingham 2025, which means when we come up with words like animoa, when we come up with these clashes, these mishy-mushies of nostalgia, they're not just confusions like postmoderns would have it, they're attempts at articulating the very messiness of everyday life. They're attempts of slowing down life despite ostensibly feeding into the machine. So it's important that we come back and establish perhaps, maybe not that journal per se, maybe not that conference per se, but that line of thinking, that through line. So to learn more, to join us again hopefully, or for the first time, those watching online, log on to our website, www.nostagain.ca/the-network. There's many hyphens. We welcome artists, scholars, practitioners, everywhere, wherever you are, and we do this every February. What's coming up and important is our web series. We received 68 abstract submissions this year, research creation and paper presentations, and we have that coming up in the spring. Again, go to nostagain.ca/events. It'll be there in the spring where we talk deeply with Matthew Horgan, one of the people online as well, on how they experience nostalgia. And finally, I just wanted to say, it's our third year here. Douglas Moffett, Bertie Gregor, Isa Perelman, and Jack Weschler, thank you so very much. With the Force Space, we have found a place for nostalgia. We have found a home for it. I want to thank also the Milieu Institute, the Technoculture Arts and Games Research Center, for just playing along with us, letting us realize this since 2022, and of course for the Concordia Council on Student Life for funding this, and the International Media Nostalgia Network. I'm going to close the Zoom portion right now, but for folks in person, there's one last thing, very quick. The entire day here, we've been talking about how you fold your memories and how you cultivate and grow with that nostalgia. A paper on its own, although limited, can draw out our nostalgias, can hold on to that lingering feeling, can reflect past futures that we think about, right? But when we present it as a beautiful thing, when it's packaged into a nostalgic thing, we lose some parts of that, right? When you fold a rose, you don't see the entire phrase or sentence. Meaning gets lost in translation, in folding, in accommodating. I encourage you, as you walk through the arch, and then through here one last time, and then on your way out, pick out a rose. Annie and Rowena will be here to help you out. Do also take one of our stickers as well for your lingering, maybe not minutes and moments, maybe a few months perhaps. take however many roses you want, bring it home as memorabilia, open it up, or keep it as is. See you again. Thank you so much. I want to thank one more time Sharon Ali, Rowena Tchaikovsky, Annie Harrison, Derek Pasborg, Ryu Pinveja, and Miruna Popovici for organizing this year's symposium. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richie. Those of you joining us online on Zoom, we're going to be closing up the live stream now. But remember, this remains available on our YouTube channel. That's what you're watching this weekend. It's going to be snowing. Have a wonderful weekend.